So let's get this started. The topic was bleed, and I'm looking at the people who are here, and it's kind of hard to judge what you know and what you don't know. I know that we had one specific question from, and I'm looking for you. There you are, from Rob. On the process plan that is part of pdfToolbox 11. Now, maybe we should do some generic or general stuff first. Let me see if I can share my screen for a second. Share. Okay, so you should see my screen now. And I just wanted to give a very small introduction to what we're doing here, and I will need a file for that as well. Obviously one with penguins. So when we talk about bleed, the amount of possibilities that you have in pdfToolbox has kind of grown over the years, and I find when I give training that people sometimes miss one or more of these things. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview, and you can find some of these bleed fixups by going into the fixups window and then just searching for bleed. Now, the original one that was in pdfToolbox, and this was used probably mostly when we were still talking about commercial print work and advertisements and stuff like that, was generate bleed by upscaling, which is as simple as scaling it up to a specific number of millimeters that you want in terms of bleed. And so this would just enlarge the page content a little bit and aim to give you the amount of bleed that you want. Now, it's a very simple method of doing it. It's also a very fast method of doing it. Unfortunately, it changes the content of the file because it makes it larger. So it's maybe not the best way of doing it. What was added after that, and I think the name changed in pdfToolbox 11 to make it more consistent. But what was added after that was, and I wanted to see if I could get the chat window open here as well, so I can see what's happening there. Sorry about that. So what was added after that was this, what is now called generate bleed at page edges. And as you can see, there are, I can try to get them all on screen. There's quite a list of parameters that go into this fix-up by now. A lot of those were added in pdfToolbox 11 again, because people kept asking for additional capabilities. And I will just point out some of the most important ones. And the most important one is this one here, which explains how the bleed is going to be generated. All of these methods leave the content of the page alone. So they will not modify the actual content of the page. And there where generate bleed by upscaling does modify what you have inside of the trim box, these leave what is inside of the trim box alone. What they will do is, and let's start with the first one, is, well, the first one will create an image from the file or from the page that you're trying to create bleed for, and then it will mirror that image to the four sides of the page. So if I look at my banner here, it will first create an image of the banner rendered at some resolution, and the resolution is actually a parameter of the fix-up. So the default is 300 dpi. It will create a 300 dpi image of the page within the trim box. And then it will mirror that image to the left, to the right, to the top, and to the bottom. And of course, it will only show the section next to the page limits up to the amount of bleed that you're asking for. And in this latest version of the fixup, you can specify the amount of bleed that you want for each of the 4 different sides individually. This is important in some cases, of course. For example, for a banner, you might want to have a certain amount of bleed on the left and the right, but the bleed you want on the top and the bottom might be much bigger than that. Yeah. So image creation and then mirroring it. You'll see that for each of these methods, there are actually 2 variants. One that will only do edges and one that will do edges and corners. And the difference between that, of course, is that if I only do edges, I will get something on the left and something on the top, but the corner will be white in this particular case. And that might very well be what you want. In some cases, the corners are used for gluing things in the back, for example. If you create bleed to then fold it over, you might use corners to do gluing operations and so on. And gluing typically doesn't work very well if there is already ink there. So then you might want to have it white. In other cases, you want bleed everywhere, and then you have to do edges and corners. So that's mirror as image. And one that is very similar to that is mirror page objects, which also does mirroring of what you have in the page to left, right, bottom, and top. But instead of first creating an image and then mirroring that image, it will take whatever objects you have on the page and mirror those. And the big difference between those 2 is that, well, the first one will create an image, and that's a little bit dangerous because it means that you end, in this case, I have some background objects, I have some text and other stuff. The bleed will be an image, the rest might not be an image. And that sometimes creates color differences if you then further process this PDF file down the line, because now you have an image that borders to something which is not an image, and you might end up with some visible color difference if you print that. The mirror page objects doesn't have that, because the objects you have outside the page in the bleed area will be the exact same ones as the ones you have inside of the page. Other than that, it behaves exactly the same. It will mirror and then it will clip, so you only see, again, the width of the bleed that you want on each side of the document. And then the third method that you have in here, repeat last pixel, is completely different. And instead of mirroring the page content, it looks at, okay, so what color do I have at the trim box? And let me create new content, also an image, on the outside of the trim box that just replicates the color at the trim box. So if the last pixel here is red, then I will end up with red all through the bleed area. And this works very well for something for a file like I have here, because it will simply extend the background image that I have in this particular document. It is sometimes a little bit difficult to figure out a general strategy for adding bleed, because, well, some files require or do better with different bleed creation methods. There are a few other parameters in here. I'm not going to go over them all. You can ask questions and then we will, then I can. But what is also an important one, and one that was added later, is this offset to box. And what this allows to do is to say that the instead of starting the bleed exactly at the trim, you can have two scenarios where you want to do something different. The first scenario is that the content of your file doesn't go exactly to the trim. There might be a fine white line between the the content of the file that you have and the trim box. And if you then do something, actually all of the methods that we have here would only increase that white line. So I would get a mirrored image, for example, but I would end up with a distinct white line around the trim box, and that's of course not what you want. In that case, I could make this offset to box a small negative value so that the bleed starts to be created from somewhere inside the trim box rather than at the trim box. And in doing so, I will avoid copying that white line between the content and the trim box, and I end up with proper bleed at the end. The other scenario where you can use this is if you have a file where the trim box, there is a trim box and there is already a little bit of bleed outside the trim box. For example, someone created 2 millimeters of bleed, and you only want to make sure that you add some additional bleed content around it. In that case, if I know that I have 2 millimeters of bleed, I could say, well, I'm going to start there instead of at the trim box, because I can assume that the bleed that is already there is going to be better than the one that I add myself at some point. So this is these are the most important parameters, perhaps. And then the third possibility to add bleed was also something that was added, I believe, in pdfToolbox 11. I've had too many different versions of pdfToolbox now. And that is bleed that is not for rectangular documents like the one that I have open, but that would be for irregular shapes. And I actually have a very nice file for that as well. So if I have something that doesn't have a rectangular shape, but you still need to create bleed, for example, because this thing has to be cut out on a laser cutter, I want to add bleed for that as well. And that is something that you can do with the, let me search for bleed here because I think I have one. So there is one in here that is, not sure this is in the product or just in mine. I think it's one that I created, hopefully. It's called Create Bleed for Penguins. It's a very good example. It also works for non-penguins. And that is the third bleed creation fix-up, which will create bleed for irregular shapes. And so parameters are very similar. I can specify what the resolution of the image has to be. I can specify how much bleed I want and an offset for the bleed, all like we did before. But this time, instead of specifying which sides of the document I want to create bleed on, in this case, I'm going to say that the bleed is going to be created from a shape, and mostly the shape is going to be visible page content. And so if I would run test on this, I'm not sure what this will do on this one. There we go. So what it did was it detected where the page content on the page is, and then it created bleed everywhere where you have a border between objects and the background. So around all the borders of the objects that you have in this file. Now it looks like it completely ruined it. If you would cut this on a laser cutter again, then you would actually get the shape that you want. Yeah, so you would get something that looks nice. There are a few options in here that are also very important, and one is I think show that by doing something else to this file first. So if I do this, then this is how the file would probably come in if it was created correctly. I have the same file, but now there is a cut contour around the page content. So there is this magenta line that you have around it, which would typically be used by the laser cutter to cut the file to final size. Now, the problem with this is that if I now take this file and I create bleed and I'm not careful, the cut contour will also be replicated. Yeah. So if we go back to our bleed example, I'm asking pdfToolbox to create bleed from the visible visible page content. Now the cut contour is also part of the visible page content, so it would normally also create bleed from the visible page content, and I would get something, or from the cut contour, and I would get something that is not correct. There are two ways you can work around that. The first one is you can specify which elements have to be replicated, and that is mostly there because very often you want to filter out certain types of objects. For example, in most cases, you don't want to use text as part of the bleed, because if the text would come too close to the trim box, you would also end up with mirror text outside of the trim box in the case of a rectangular page, or in this case, it might actually affect the color that you get outside of the trim box. So you can use that to filter out certain types of elements. What you can also do, and which is often much easier, is I can have a list here of, well, I can either have one spot color or a regex, for example, but I can have certain spot colors that are not replicated into the bleed. And this is particularly useful for the cut contour. If I know that my cut contour is going to be called cut, then simply by having the name of that spot color in here, I will make it so that pdfToolbox will create bleed from the visible page content, but it will not create bleed from the cut contour. Yeah. And then you have some other options that might sometimes be helpful. One is that you can create bleed, and normally it will be created in front of the current page content, but you can set it to create the bleed in the back of the page as well, behind the content that is already there, which might be useful. Well, I already said the width of the bleed, so you can create 2 or 3 or 5 millimeter, and then also an offset, same as for rectangular pages. Now, this is a very short overview of what the possibilities are in here. There is one other thing that was added in pdfToolbox 11, which is a very specific process plan for to help with bleed creation. But that was created by Peter Kleinheider, and I want him to talk about that. Before we do that, let me ask if there are actually any questions from anyone about anything I've said so far.
David, it's Rob here.
Yes.
You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I've just emailed you 2 files, and I'll show you the issues that I'm having. If you can get them open. One is the original file, and one is how we are adding bleed. Mm-hmm. And our main issue is we're good if there is no bleed. It will detect and it will add bleed. The problem is when we do have bleed, and there'll be an element on the page that doesn't bleed, and it will pick that up also. Yeah. And then it will just add bleed to everything. The 2 examples I've sent you is one is it says bleed added. So this is the original, I guess, and then that's the original. So you've got a good file there. You've got if you look at page 2, there's 2 pages in there. That file, yeah. There's that picture of the octopus on the right hand side, halfway up. That's not bleeding. Okay. So our check picks up that's not bleeding, and of course then it starts to add bleed. And as you can see, that file there has added to everything, mm-hmm. which is unnecessary. Yeah. And that's the main issue. That's our main issue with it. And you can see that page is again is good. It doesn't need it. Yeah. But there's certain elements, and there's also a hidden element in there, which is like a target mark. in the background, which causes the trim, and the checkers picked up that as well. So that's the thing. If there is no bleed, we're all good. If there is bleed and it's unnecessary, it doesn't. As soon as it triggers something, it'll just add it to everything.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is one, I think, specifically where you worked with this new process plan in pdfToolbox 11, right?
Yeah, if I use Calibrate, it works as intended. It picks up that there are some elements, but it doesn't add bleed everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what we, where we want to get to. That's the difficult part I'm finding.
But David, actually, if you run this file with the process plan we have created, it shouldn't create a bleed, and if it does, it's plainly a bug because there is bleed.
Yeah, that's good if you're doing it manually, isn't it? If you want to automate.
No, I'm talking about automatically.
So let's maybe look at your process plan, Peter, and let you explain how it's supposed to work, and then we can see if it would still work for these files as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want, you can share your screen. I think you can just do that. If not, I'm not sure what I need to do here. I probably have to switch off mine then.
Yeah.
Let me stop my sharing. There we go. And now you should be able to share yours, I think.
Desktop 2. That looks good. So you see my screen now?
Yes. Kostenloser Flohmarkt. Yes.
That's an example of a PDF that obviously has no bleed. The green line that you see represents the trim box. And I now run the process plan that was shipped with pdfToolbox 11, and then later I elaborate what technique we used to achieve that kind of stuff.
Peter, before you go on, you should probably introduce yourself briefly as well, because there might be people who have no idea who you are.
Okay, good. My name is Peter Kleinheider. I run a consultancy company in Austria called Calibrate Workflow Consulting. I've been working with colors technologies since years. I worked for about 4 years. I was myself product manager of the pdfToolbox product when the pdfToolbox, as you know it today, was released. That is also the time when the work together with Four Pees started. So there's a good knowledge of how pdfToolbox works. And ever since I left Colors, I kept on working very closely together with them to create completely automated workflow solutions, now also running in the cloud to support pre-flighting and fixing to a next level, so to speak. And one issue we came across very often when the first bleed check of colors was introduced, when objects could be checked if they're inside or outside or crossing a trim box. We found that there are too many false positives, so to speak. Because even if we look at a PDF with the human eye, we see one object, whereas in the PDF it can be an area where multiple objects are, and if you compare just every individual object to the trim box, you might get hits for objects that are not seen by the human, from the human as an individual object, but part of a larger object. So after pdfToolbox 10 came out and the possibility to do total ink coverage rendering using the effective total area coverage, we had the idea to render individual small images along the edges, each individual edge of a PDF, to find out if actually is this an edge where bleed is needed at all, and if there is bleeded, if there was bleed, and if there was bleed, if there was enough bleed. also to catch edges where there is, for example, just 1 millimeter of bleed instead of 3 millimeters. I don't want to claim that that this bleed checks covers all the necessary bleed checks that should be done, but from the experience we had until now, I would say we catch about 90% of the missing bleeds, with the possibility to add bleed. What we cannot detect yet is which method to add bleed is the correct one. So is the correct one to add bleed by mirroring the page, or is the correct one by performing a pixel repetition, or is the correct one to scale the PDF a little bit? That is very context sensitive, context dependent. And at the moment, we can only define a default behavior. And if you don't like, you as the end user, you don't like the default behavior, you have to run the whole thing again and choose a different method for that. But where is my dialogue now? That idea with working with rendered images per edge, and it's not just one image per edge. We render at the moment 3 different images per edge and compare them to each other, gives a good indication if a bleed is needed, and if it's needed, if it's there, as I just said, and if it's there, if it's large enough. For that, we had to create a process plan. My hope is still that this process plan will be incorporated into a single fix with business intelligence built in, that what we have done with a script at the moment, because if you want to add this one check and fix to your own profile, you cannot just add it to a profile, but because it is a process plan. So you, as an integrator, you would always have to create a process plan to trigger this process plan as a so-called sub-process plan. But that's the way it works at the moment. Let us run this version here with that file.
By the way, we have Ulrich from Callas in the cafe as well, so you should probably repeat that point a couple of times while you're doing this.
What I will also show you then is the new version we have. Okay. I made an extension, but the version we have here is that are the parameters we can define. So that is the safety zone where we decide if all elements reach inside this safety zone measured to the inside from the trim box, then we consider that this is an edge that requires bleed. If we create bleed, we require 3 millimeters of bleed. But if there was already a bleed, we allow this already existing bleed to be a little bit smaller, up to 25% of the required bleed. So if 3 millimeters is required and the bleed in the PDF is just 2 millimeters, then that's also fine. No, 2 millimeters would be too little because this is 66%. But if it's 2.3 or something like that, we still consider it as enough. Then you can define obviously the unit. If bleed is missing at the moment, you have here the possibility to choose the. Oh, it's not in here yet. That was. It's a feature for the next version. So if bleed is missing, you can say add a bleed. And obviously, if you want to add bleed, it shall give the possibility, not in this, but in a future version, the method how to add the bleed. And then you have to define, is this a single page or is this a facing page? Meaning we can differentiate between a left page and a right page in a magazine because there's no bleed on the at the spine side, at the inner side. So I now do a check without the creation of the bleed. And what it tells me here, bleed is missing on the left, on the right, and on the top page. And we do this check for every page individually in the whole PDF. So here you would get then the list of pages where a left page, where the bleed on the left edge is missing, and so on and so forth. Obviously, if we now would run the same process plan with the option to add bleed, then it would only add the bleed on the edges where the software figured out there is a missing bleed. So when I see the result from David before, where bleed was added even there was no bleed needed, then it's either a bug or it was only the fix-up was carried out that creates the bleed, but not the process plan was being used that first checks if a bleed is missing at all or not. So that's the one version, and I told you I have now a new version we are working on where I have to talk with Dietrich if Carlos is interested to implement that as well. And the main difference is I have now to switch to a different so we're just talking about this missing bleed feature in here. I have to check something in a different file. Just give me a second. Okay, missing bleed. And if we run this check, it tells me now there is missing bleed on the left and the right side edges. So this version combines all the possible combinations of edges. Meaning if there was now a second page that where only the left on the left side bleed was missing, you would get an additional hit here. When we now open the original from the former PDF, from the flow marked, and we run that on the flow marked PDF. So that was this here. Oh, sorry, that was the corrected flow marked. Here you already see that was the corrected version. Obviously, if we run the check again, it shouldn't find any missing bleed. But if we go to the original, now you get a hit here. Bleed is missing on the left, right, and top side edges. So the new version combines all the possible combinations of missing bleed edges and tell you exactly on which page, which edges the bleed is missing. We have created this additional version because when we now add a bleed, we do not add the bleed on each side individually, but when we add in the bleed, we would tell the pdfToolbox fixup in the background, create the bleed on the left, right, and top side on page 1 in one run in order to avoid the white rectangles that David was talking about before.
And you combined, so the error message tells you on which sides. Yeah. What happens if you have different pages where the sides are different? Does that work as well?
Yeah. If you had a second, I don't have, I would need to create one. If you had now a second page where, for example, just the bottom bleed was missing, you would get a second hit where it tells you bleed is missing on bottom edge.
Yeah, okay.
Right, as before, it would tell you bleed is missing left, right, top, and bottom, and bottom and top, and you would have to look up on which page all 4 edges are missing, for example. So, and that is so if that means we have in the background we have 16 different combinations of edges with missing bleed that are possible per page. Okay.
Yes.
So if we would now run the file that we saw before, where the bleed was added on edges where the bleed was already defined, it shouldn't add a bleed with this with this process plan, even the one that is shipped with version 11.
You can try that if you want, because you should have it.
Okay, I don't have this file.
Yes, you do.
I do?
Yes.
Okay, I do, you see.
I'm getting better at multitasking, so you do.
So I now run my new version to see what it would tell me. It would tell me no bleed is missing. And if we look at the pages, no bleed is missing, hence it would not create bleed.
Is that what you would expect for this file, Rob, or is there something we're not seeing?
No, yeah, that's exactly what I need, but I can't create that with how I'm doing it. That's the problem. Because the Calibrate process plan in version 11, because the add bleed feature is switched off, you can't automate it in Switch, can you?
Sure you can.
Yes, you can.
Can you?
Yes. You can, I mean, basically this is a process plan, so you could export this process plan and then use it in Switch.
Okay, all right, I'll try that. It's just that I thought because you had to tell it to, because it says create required bleed is off, it wouldn't do it. It wouldn't do anything.
Okay, but those are variables that you would have to specify in Switch.
Okay.
So if you put this in Switch in the configurator, then the configurator has a way of passing variables to the process plan.
Okay.
Using what is it called in the configurator, dynamic profile or dynamic properties. And there you would have to tell it what exactly to do. That's not a problem. We can do that.
Okay.
So and the variables you need to pass to pdfToolbox. Let me see where I have.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Can we see what they are?
Yeah. Show you in a second. For whatever reason, my export variables dialog does not pop up. That's strange.
Might be.
I could now look in my open script to find out what was the name of the variables.
It would be nice if there would be.
Let me close that again.
Hold on.
And run it once more. Oh, now it works. But the file is not being created. It asks me, but it doesn't create the file.
Okay.
Let me try a different folder. So we go to the desktop folder. No, it does not export the profile. I will find them out while you talk about something different, David, maybe in the meantime.
Yeah.
Peter,
Yeah.
Peter, you can try to run the profile with log profile execution on. Then you get
okay.
a variables JSON file where all the variables should be contained in.
That's a good idea. Log profile execution.
The export variables, Ulrich, doesn't seem to work on my system either for this.
I've seen that. I've noted that. So.
Yeah. So that not that I'm implying that you have bugs in the software, but
No.
there might be a bug with our systems.
I think so. Yes.
Okay, I now move over all the variables, but you do not need to define all the variables. Let us go through the variables that you need to create. You only need to pass those 6 variables with exactly that name in the switch configurator for pdfToolbox. I will show you in a second because I have a switch. I just opened my switch and show you what you can define that.
Could you share those variables in the Facebook group afterwards? Just so that we have an easy way to pick them up.
Yeah, I will, you know what, I'm going to write it in a way that how it can be used exactly in pdfToolbox, in the pdfToolbox configurator in
Switch. Yeah, perfect.
What I show you in a second. So what you would have to do in Switch is then obviously you have to add this, enable this feature, and in this dialog, you have to define the variables. I just open and close it once so we see it in a nicer way. That is the way how you would write it then.
Yeah.
And that is the text I'm going to post in the Facebook group.
Yeah, that would be perfect. So basically, Rob, on each line you have what you have is a definition of the variable, so the symbolic name of the variable, and then a colon, and then the value that you want to pass.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so for this var, the var 5 that you have in there, that defines whether bleed needs to be created or not. In your case, you would have to set that to on so that it would generate bleed.
Okay, that's great.
The only thing that I don't know, there's an open ticket, I think, with colors. You must not write off here. You have to write here 0 and 1 instead of off and on.
Okay, yeah. But that's because there are checkboxes, I guess.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's an open ticket, and colors is still waiting for my example.
Okay.
Yeah, and Rob, you just would need to export the process plan and use those variables in Switch, and then it should work as expected. What I want to mention, what I have to mention, if one image here, for example, on the right side, would not be placed with bleed. So, for example, if there was a bleed for the top image and the image in the middle, on the middle of the page, but if there was no bleed on the bottom image, on this bottom card of the page, this is something it would not detect, because I check always the complete edge as one object.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I had already the idea to segment every edge in 2 or 3 parts to be more precise, but the question is where to stop then.
Yeah. Yeah, because every segmentation you come up with, you can still have an example that that would not work. So,
and what I'm also working on now is, you mentioned it before, David, even when you add bleed and the element was not ending at the trim box, but just maybe a tenth before the trim box, you would end up with a white line in between. I'm now going to render a fourth image, which is a little bit inside the trim box to detect if every object really reaches to the trim box, and if not, I would add the bleed already starting 0.5 millimeter from inside the trim box and using the underlay feature of the new Great Bleed function.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheers, Peter. That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So thank you for that, Peter. I think the question now is there anyone else who has open questions regarding this topic, or have we kind of answered, mostly Peter, what you wanted to see here? And everyone is very quiet, so I guess the answer is...
everyone is afraid that we now start with JavaScript.
Yeah, I think so. The chance is pretty high, actually, so... Loïc, if you have a question, please, go ahead.
Well, actually, hi, everyone. It's not really a question because just mostly a curiosity, and it's great that Ulrich is here. Last time I talked to someone in the prepress industry. They were desperately looking for a solution for bleeding, including artificial intelligence. The reason why I'm saying that is that the solutions are always the same for bleeding, meaning mirroring or standing pixel and so on. And those people were asking if there was a way to have something more intelligent, like Adobe does with content-aware reproduction stuff and so on. So my question is just curiosity: is Calas working at some point on this, or I mean, is this even part of the reflection, or is it very science fiction and something that we shouldn't see anytime soon?
Yeah, we definitely look into options we have in this area, but we are currently not planning to do any artificial intelligence or machine learning approach for lead creation.
Okay, thank you.
But there is, Loïc, I think I can state that the subject for bleed creation and detection is one that is always very, very prominent and active. And it's certainly still on our radar. And we've had some requests on, I'm being deliberately vague, because I don't want to do product announcements, or I don't want to give anyone hope. But we've had some feedback from people who say that there are maybe other methods that are being used here and there to also create bleed, and we're looking into that as well. So it is a topic that keeps coming back. If you have feedback or you have specific questions, and that's for you, Loïc, but also for everyone else, of course. If you think that something else than what is in the product right now would work much better, in general, or for the files that you are processing, please talk to us and give us the feedback.
Yes, and send examples.
Yes. So I should explain this. Every time I ask in Calas to get something, the first question is, can we please get examples? And it's often very difficult to get good examples back, and then it doesn't happen. So if you want something to happen, getting a number of good examples together would be an excellent first step. Any other questions? Doesn't appear so. Very good.
My question would be when you you saw the current version of the bleed checking where we just report left, right, top, and bottom per page, and the new version where you get a hit per combination. Any idea which version any of you would prefer over the other?
This is your chance to speak up, people.
What is the benefit of the new version? Is the bleed creation in some way better than the other one? Or
The one thing is, if you had only one page, you would only get one hit on this one page and not a hit per edge. If you have a multi-page document, you would have it grouped by on which edges the bleed is missing. And when we create the bleed, we have also there are 16 different possibilities of combining the edges, meaning we avoid the white rectangles, because we have then the possibility for each fix to say create it on the left and on the top side in one fix and not in two separate subfixes as it is done at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds like the new one is better than the old one then.
But even if it's just the reporting, for me, I think the combination would be better, because fewer errors that are more correct, that's usually preferred by the customers I talk to. The more intelligent you can make the error messages so that they really reflect what the problem is, the better it is, I think. And everyone else is too shy to speak up.
You get more messages with the new version. You get up to 16 messages, and otherwise you get only 4 messages.
For multi-page documents, this is correct. But for example, if you now would navigate to page 4, in the hit that tells you left edge is missing, you wouldn't immediately get the information on which other edges the bleed is also missing. So yes, it's correct. If it's a multi-page document and bleed is missing on different edges, it can end up with 16 different hits at the end. That's correct.
But the chance on that is not so high.
Correct, but it would tell you per page.
Yeah.
Every page would get its hit and telling you on which edges there is missing bleed. So you should know immediately on which edges to look at. But yeah, that is why I'm asking. I mean, we have it done already for various reasons, and the main reason was the technical reason I mentioned before, where we can combine the bleed creation in one fix and not in that version. The bleed is added for every edge individually and not as a combination, which gives issues in the adjacent corners. That was the reason for the change.
Okay. No other comments, so everyone is happy.
And still there's the request, please colors make a intelligent fix out of that process plan.
Yes. Yeah, we are currently looking at this for Toolbox 12, and from the architectural point of view, it's difficult to include a process plan inside a fix-up, obviously. So we are looking at the options at the moment. But it's on the list.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that everyone had their questions answered. If not, and you come up with something else around this topic, just throw it into the user group on Facebook, and we will take a look at that. This was a specific question from Rob. So thank you, Rob, for the suggestion for this. As you can see, we actually do organize cafes if there is an interesting question. If someone else has something they would like us to talk about, please let me know. Thank you very much for joining this one. It was recorded. The recording will be available in the group, and I'm sure I will see many of you again in a next cafe. Thank you very much.